Today on Locked On Red Wings, Austin Watson signs a new contract with the Red Wings and then is immediately waived. What the heck is going on?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I am a color commentator for Oakland University Hockey, while Scotty is the host over at Locked On Tigers. And I think tomorrow's episode today's episode by the time people are listening to this, it's going to be a must listen for the Metro Detroit area in terms of Locked On Tigers. He's also a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And Scotty, I just want to give you a moment here. I know this is Locked On Red Wings, but that was the biggest... I don't want to say the biggest playoff game that Detroit's seen in a decade because the Lions did just make a really nice run, but it was definitely the biggest baseball game to have been played in the last decade. I just want to give you a moment to rejoice on Locked On Red Wings and plug your show for Locked On Tigers because I am also an avid Tigers fan, not nearly as much as you are. You take the cake when it comes to like all that business, but wow.
It was wild, man. It was wild. Yeah, I actually have an article coming out with the news on Tuesday too, and nobody's gonna care about it. It's about high school sports. Like it's cool. Like the swimming season is like down the home stretch. It completely dwarfs the other work that I will be doing. Funny enough, but yeah, man, what a moment. The Kerry Carpenter home run, definitely one of the biggest homers in recent memory for the Tigers. And my neighbors in my apartment complex weren't too happy with me there for a little bit, but that's okay. We ball, and now the Tigers have home field advantage here for the last 3 games of this series. So wild, absolutely wild. Tarek Skubal's the man too.
And by winning one game, the Detroit Tigers will be playing Game 4 at Comerica Park Thursday at 6 p.m., an hour before the Red Wings play their home opener. And the Red Wings decided to make some I'll say it, baffling roster moves today. And baffling in that, like, before you look into it, it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. We've had hours to sit on it. We've had hours to think on it. I feel like I have an understanding of what happened today, even if I'm still like not 100%. Like I have like a 75% grasp on what happened today.
Sure.
And before I get to that, I got to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Scotty, so today the Red Wings signed Austin Watson to a one-year deal, one-year, two-way deal, $775,000 at the NHL level, $200,000 at the AHL level. So first thing that crossed my mind when I saw this deal is, there it is, right? Like, writing felt like it was on the wall yesterday when they waived Justin Holl, who, by the way, did clear waivers and was sent down to the Grand Rapids Griffins. And they did also reassign all the first-round picks, save MBN to Grand Rapids, including Marco Casper. MBN went back to the SHL, where he's probably better served. So when the Watson signing to me got announced, I was like, yeah, there it is. That makes sense. 1 year, two-way deal is good value for what he brought. He kind of proved himself in the preseason to have a value to this team that they needed. I still had my reservations about it, Scotty, because I said on yesterday's episode, I'm not hugely in love with the pure enforcer in the NHL anymore. But I do think that the Red Wings as a team needed somebody to stand up for their stars. We can't have DeBrincat. We can't have Sider getting into fights. They need to be on the ice, not sitting for 5+ minutes in the box. So I understood it, and I was accepting of that deal, even if I don't necessarily love, the downsides of having somebody who's a pure enforcer. What were your thoughts on the Austin Watson deal when you first saw it? Not even getting to the second part that happened afterwards, but just the deal as it is.
Yeah, I don't have too much else to add. I think really my initial thought was the same as yours. It was, okay, there we go. There's the answer. We talked about this yesterday. We talked about how we were almost certain that this meant that Austin Watson was going to be on the NHL roster. He was going to get the 13th spot. Justin Holl was going to get sent down. We saw that move as well. Very close to around the same time was the roster has been trimmed to 23. Justin Holl sent down to the AHL. Boom. I was like, okay, there's our roster, right? And that's what we're going to discuss on tonight's show. I was, game planning. I was like, oh yeah, Brian and I will just talk about the final roster. We'll talk about Watson. We'll talk about Holl getting sent down, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next few hours happened, and now again, no one's really 100% sure, but we at least have somewhat of an idea of what it's going to look like, and it's nothing like we just explained. What we think is going to happen now the rest of the way is not what we thought yesterday, and it's not what I thought when they initially announced the Austin Watson contract. Two-way deal, which even more so was like, okay, like they want to give a little bit of flexibility there, but two-way deals do not affect waivers and waiver eligibility, which we very quickly all were reminded of there very shortly after the contract was announced.
Yeah, EA has had everybody fooled for decades now that being a two-way player, two-way contract means that you don't have to go through waivers. That is not true. Two-way players still have to go through waivers. And as 2 o'clock rolled around and it was announced that, who cleared waivers and everyone who was on the Red Wings waiver wire cleared, that's also when it was announced that Austin Watson, the ink not even dried on his contract, was then placed on waivers. Right. So now everyone's going, hold up. Holl got sent down to the minors, but now you're putting Watson on waivers, and he's going to get sent down to the minors. That's going to leave you with 22 players on the roster. Heads were spinning. Everybody was super confused. Then Derek Lalonde comes out and says, basically to expect Justin Holl on the roster come day one of the season. And the line rushes at practice included Holl on the fourth pair, so to speak. He and Albert Johansson as the extras, the extra pair. And nowhere to be found was Austin Watson as he was placed on waivers. And it was chalk, Scotty. It was the exact lineup we had been predicting for the last 3 months. You had Larkin, DeBrincat, Raymond, Comfort, Tarasenko, Kane, all the way down from offensive to defensive pairs. They're going to carry 12 forwards, 8 defensemen, 3 goaltenders to start the season. Derek Lalonde confirmed that. So why then, Scotty, if Justin Holl is going to be on this roster, was he sent down? We have a couple different theories.
Yeah, I think the initial, first off, I think the scenario that you laid out earlier today and before we got on air is probably the correct answer, and I'm sure you'll take the floor and kind of lay that out here in a second. I think that I want to end the show now. That was I can't believe we just nay-nayed on air. I think initially I saw some people that were like, well, yeah, you just got to see if anybody else will take them. And it's like, well, I'm sure if somebody else claimed Justin Holl that the Wings would not be upset whatsoever. Right. But they knew that he was not going to get claimed. That is not why they solely why they put him on waivers. They were not like, that is not. There's a lot of salary implications, a lot of cap implications with all of that. And also, I think a point that you made yesterday or maybe earlier today was that Austin Watson, that deal had to get finalized, right? PTO is not an NHL contract. Like you have to sign and put pen to paper and actually sign a contract with the organization. So all of these factors I think played into it. I don't think, them just hoping that someone would take him had anything to do with it.
Right. I think at the end of the day, and there's something about salary accrual too, which Connor Irga to the Hockey News wrote about, and I will.
Great job. Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest. I still don't understand salary accrual. It was a great explanation. I'm gonna recite a blurb from his article in segment 2.
No, he does a great job of breaking it down. Yeah,
he does. And after I recite the blurb, go read his stuff over at the Hockey News. But I'll talk about that in segment 2. But I'll talk about the primary theory that I have going on. It honestly doesn't feel much of a theory, but like once you think about it, it's like actually that makes a lot of sense, and it's honestly not very exciting, and it's kind of what you hinted at there, where it comes to the fact that Austin Watson needed a contract, and the deal wasn't done before the 5 p.m. deadline today to get this roster down to 23. So we'll talk about that in segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check on the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you can place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. All right, Scotty. So I think the real, I haven't had confirmation, right? But this is the theory I have, and it feels like it makes a lot of sense. And I could be completely wrong. I oftentimes are. Oftentimes are. Yes, that's right. I struggled for a second if it's oftentimes is, but that doesn't make any sense.
Oftentimes am or are. It depends on.
Oftentimes am. Anyway, he's the writer. I trust whatever he says. Scotty, Justin Holl, the Red Wings yesterday, like you were saying in segment 1, had not finalized the deal with Austin Watson. But the waiver deadline to waive players to make your roster compliant was yesterday. So, and by yesterday, I mean Sunday. So to waive players to have them clear by the time your roster needed to be finalized at 5 p.m., you had to waive them on Sunday to have it complacent with 5 p.m. Monday. But they wanted to sign Austin Watson to a NHL contract, but they were still hammering out the deal past that waiver deadline, waiver time deadline. So they had to waive somebody else. So they had a little extra time to sign Austin Watson to this contract to then be able to waive him on Monday and not have it, become a risk going against the rules for the 23-man roster. So they looked at their roster and said, who can we waive that is not going to get picked up, but also at the same time is not going to be detrimental if we waive? And that was Justin Holl. 2 years left at a $3.5 million contract or whatever it is. He was a guy that at that cap number with the games he played last year was likely not going to get picked up at his full cap hit. But at the same time, if they had to start the season without him on the roster, they were going to be okay because they still have 7 other defensemen. So they said, okay, we'll waive Justin Holl. That'll get us down to 22 players so that when we sign Austin Watson on Monday, when that deal is finalized, we'll be at 23 and we'll be compliant with the rule books with a 23-man roster. So once he cleared and that deal was on the books, now they said, okay, now we can thereby waive Austin Watson and call Justin Holl back up. Obviously, they have not called Justin Holl back up. There's some other things maybe going on, but that's like my basic theory as to why they waived Justin Holl in the first place, and it was to simply make it so that they had extra time to sign Austin Watson and then waive him.
Well, they haven't called him back up. He practiced with the team today.
Right.
They haven't called him back up on paper, right? Like he is practicing with the NHL roster, which is the important thing to point out with all of this. So yeah, I think that theory is probably the clubhouse leader, and I think that now we can just throw in the garbage everything we talked about yesterday, and when we start looking at the roster now, we're right back to 12-8-3, and it makes me want to scream and cry and throw up and I don't know what else. Like I don't get it. I don't get it, man. I don't understand the need to do 12-8-3. I really don't. So I think that once you get past all of the theatrics that happened and you end up at the same starting point that you were already at, before all of this started happening, when we started, talking about, oh, is Casper going to make the team? Oh, it's going to be Watson. Oh, Holl is going to be sent down. And now we're sitting here less than 48 hours from the first puck drop of the year, and it's still 12-8-3, and it's been the same roster it's been for 2 or 3 months now, and it's just I'm not saying that Austin Watson is like the guy that would have come, he would have been probably the 13th forward on the team. Like I'm not saying that that's that the roster is so completely different, like talent wise or production wise or etc. But I just really don't get going into the season rather with this roster constructed the way it is.
I actually do like, though, I will say this, Austin Watson as an AHL call-up guy. I think he is like...
I love it as organizational depth. I think it's
Right.
a very successful PTO for the organization.
But I was talking, you can find this thread on social media too, on Twitter. I was talking to Beer League Chump about it. And like, ultimately, the Red Wings did 12-8-3 last year. And I think the year before that, they had 8 defensemen too when we had the, Gustav Lindstrom, Robert Haig, and Jordan Osterley.
Yeah.
Not that was a great 6, 7, 8, trifecta going there. But they've done it for a couple of years, and last year it worked out all right. It hasn't been super detrimental to the team. I think it's kind of emphasized right now because, to me, it was very clear Marco Casper earned a roster spot. And I want to talk about Casper, the implications on him in segment 3, absolutely. I think that's why the 12-8-3, as bizarre as it is, and I agree with you, it's so weird. Like, it's just so unorthodox for an NHL team to carry just 12 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 3 goaltenders instead of a 13th forward. It just seems bizarre and unorthodox, but it's not like it's gonna ruin your season, because this team is gonna trot out the same at least 10, 11 forwards regardless if you have a 13th forward. They're gonna go 11-7 some games. The thing that drives me nuts about it the most is you're gonna have 8 defensemen, so you're gonna have one defenseman who basically just does not play. Like, he'll get 1 out of every 8 games. That's the one thing that just kind of drives me nuts about this structure. But, like, it really, day to day, the implication behind having a 13th forward or not having a 13th forward isn't that massive. It's just weird.
Yeah, it's not massive in... It is not massive from game to game in the sense that obviously 12 forwards are going to dress every night. It gets instantly more massive when you have a forward, I don't know, like go down in first period or in a back-to-back, or like, I don't know. Like, I understand, like, they have guys on 2-way deals and they're going to have guys that are waiver exempt. They're going to have guys they can call up from game to game. I totally understand that. I just, from a even more micro scale, I feel like that's, I think pointless is the word I want to use. Like, it's really, really weird to me, and does not make much sense to just be like, well, we'll just do 12-8-3. Like, for what reason? I understand that maybe it's not the biggest deal in the world, that I'm maybe over exaggerating for why it shouldn't happen, but I haven't heard an overwhelmingly great argument about why it should either.
Yeah, it's just weird. That's where, like, obviously I've put logic behind and explained as best I could in my terms as to why the Watson Holl thing happened. But, like, it still doesn't explain away why it has to be 12-8-3, which is something we've talked about all season long. The other aspect to this too is, like, so here's the rules in terms of waiver wire, right? So Justin Holl clears waivers, but he does not get sent down, although he did technically get sent down on paper, but he's going to stay with the team. He'll likely be called back up again closer here to the start of the season, I would imagine. He does not then have to clear waivers again for either 31 days or until he has played 10 games played. Both of those things have to happen, I believe. So if he plays 10 or more games, he has to go through waivers again. If 31 days goes by, he has to clear waivers again. But if those things don't happen, if both of those things don't happen, he does not have to clear waivers to get sent back down. So they have the option here to have Justin Holl in Detroit and to play some games if need be, but then to still, if it benefits them, to send him to Grand Rapids and call somebody else in his stead. So by having him clear waivers now, you still do get an added benefit. And on top of that, this is where I'll get into the salary accrual. You have the ability to accrue salary for the players that are not in the lineup. And I'll talk about that in segment 3 from the Connor Eargood Hockey News article, because I just realized we're getting close to it. So stay tuned in segment 3. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't help you just hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Indeed you do.
Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. The other aspect of this roster juggling that's going on at the waiver wire has to do with salary accrual. And I just explained that, Justin Holl can be sent down as long as 31 days has not passed or he has not played 10 plus NHL games. Whatever happens first makes it so he has to go through waivers again. But right now, once he's called back up, he can still be sent back down without the waivers before those things happen. Here's where salary accrual happens. And this is from Connor Eargood's article. It says, most of us are familiar with cap space as a year-long concept. If a player signs for $1 million, then a team is committing $1 million in cap space to them for the season. But cap hit is actually calculated by prorating the daily cap hit through however many days are left in the season. So long as a team doesn't take advantage of long-term injured reserve, whatever is left over to reach the salary, whatever is left over to reach the salary cap is saved up as something called accrued cap space. Accrued cap space is calculated with the formula projected cap space times total days in the season divided by days left in the season. Accrued cap space is essentially saved up cap space that teams can use to afford bigger transactions later on. Let's say a team comes in $2 million under the salary cap all season. By the 100th day of the 192-game season, they can spend $3.84 million and still be under the salary cap. So basically what he is saying is by waiving Justin Holl and keeping him off the books as long as possible, they are saving money. They did this with Simon Edvinsson. Remember, at the end of last season, where they kept sending Simon Edvinsson back and then recalling him within 2 days. He never actually left because every single time they did that, they had his contract off the books. They were then saving money and building money to spend every single day he was not on the roster. With Justin Holl being sent down and off the roster, at least on paper, he there now is an extra $1.15 million off the cap, which I think he explains as being an extra almost $6,000 a day that the Red Wings would save by not having Justin Holl in the NHL salary, which then could go to money spent at the trade deadline if they were buyers. So when Derek Llewellyn mentions in his comments that it has to do with like salary cap stuff, that's what he means. Accrued salary cap is something I had no idea was a thing before today. I will not sit here and try to explain to you how important that is because I still don't fully understand it. Full props for Connor Eargood for making that somewhat understandable, but the understanding here is that by keeping both these guys off the roster, Watson and Justin Holl, you have a little bit more cap space, which each day will accrue more cap space that you can then spend later on in the season, if that be another guy you want to sign or hopefully buying at the trade deadline. Right.
Yeah, we can run 9. We can run 11, 9, and 3 maybe
there you
go. If we accrue enough. Yeah, no.
Another goalie. Let's do 10, 9, and 4.
I think you're onto something. Honestly, well, at that point, there's no point in having one fourth liner. So at that point, we should just do 9,
10, and 4?
And 4? Yeah. I like it. No, but I think, that's, again, all credit to him. That's really well written and explained. And yeah, definitely go check out the work there and get a full explanation of it all. I think really, like, that's all great. And I hope that is what is happening. And that's obviously helpful for the Wings. I think really my mind just goes back to the conversation we had yesterday at the end of all of this. And it's just like, well, Justin Holl or Watson or Casper. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I think, we, a lot of people were hyped up for Casper, and then it was Austin Watson, and it was okay. Well, it's not as fun as Marco Casper, but sure, like, he had a really good, he had a pretty good preseason. He fills a role, etc. And now we've just gone completely, and this is nothing against Hull specifically. It's just like, we're just back to where we were all off season. And like, the roster is just the same as it was all off season. I think a lot of us, myself definitely included, were kind of holding out hope that it wasn't going to be 12-8-3, and they were gonna, kind of weasel their way into some other flexibility in the forward group, and doesn't look like that's the case. They're gonna roll into the season with this. So
I just can't imagine.
Ultimately, go for it.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I can't imagine Justin Holl's like pleased with the situation. It goes back to what we were talking about in the offseason. Right. Like, wouldn't he, like, you're playing 38 games after signing a brand new contract that pays you over $3 million a year? I would think I'm upset about that. And I mean, maybe I find it so weird that a professional athlete would not be so competitive that they wouldn't want to be in the everyday lineup. But like, maybe he is like, whatever, I'm collecting a paycheck. But that would be, you don't get to the NHL by not having competitive spirit. Like, I know there are rare.
They put him on waivers. Nobody claimed him. Clearly, no one can trade for him, because I think the Wings would have done it instantly if anybody was like, hey, let's talk Justin Holl. Like, I think I don't think he has a choice. Like, I'm sure he does want to play. I'm sure the Wings want a guy they gave the contract they gave to him to be an everyday player too. But like, sometimes it just is what it is, man. Like, I don't think anybody in the situation really has a say at this point. I think it just kind of is what it is, and that is where the Wings find themselves. Ultimately, the rest of the roster is exactly as we expected it to be, and at the end of the day, this doesn't really change our season outlook, right? Like, we're all talking about this because it's a big thing, and for a hot second there was a chance that a fun young rookie was going to come up and join the team. That's not true, but like, the same outlook we had on the roster in the season 2 weeks ago is just the outlook that I still have now. It hasn't changed anything big picture. It's just been a weird 48 hours.
Right. And I think Ryan Hanna of Winged Wheel said it best on Twitter today when he said that the only reason any of us are even talking about this, and the only reason it's a big deal, is because there's nothing else to talk about in Red Wings land right now. Like, if this was the regular season and this happened, I think most of us would shrug our shoulders and just talk about the game in front of us.
No, it's a great point.
We'd be talking about Raymond and we'd be talking about Larkin. It's really, in the end of the day, it's confusing. It doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
Like, the one thing that bothers me about it, and I will argue is kind of a big deal, is the implications on Casper, because I do genuinely think he earned a roster spot, and I think everyone would agree with that. I don't know if anyone here is going to sit here and say Casper did not earn a roster spot after that preseason, especially over somebody like Austin Watson. Again, he plays a very niche role. It is an important role that this team does need, but I think Casper overall brings a much higher ceiling and floor to the game. It's just that Watson brings that one element this team lacks. But Casper looks like he could be, at very least, a solid third-line player right now. Now, he's not going to play on the third line if he plays with the Red Wings, and this kind of leads to where I'm going. I wonder if the reason he didn't make this roster is simply because they didn't have the minutes to give him. Because you looked at him, he looked like he could be a solid middle six player. Like, he was crushing it on the fourth line with, was it Mott and Veleno or Mott and Berggren? He was playing really well. Like, he got minutes at the second line between Kane and Tarasenko. Obviously, he didn't look as good playing tougher minutes in the preseason, but he was playing with incredible players. He was getting those opportunities, but he crushed it all preseason long. The only reason I can maybe think that they decided to go with Watson, besides the one niche element that he has that the Red Wings do need, would simply be because they looked at the construction of the roster as it stands, and they looked at Marco Casper and says, we cannot give you the minutes you deserve at the NHL level right now. Thereby, we're sending you to the Grand Rapids Griffins, where you can play 18 minutes a night as a top-line center, which is the same thing we were saying about him last year. Like, it just comes down to the roster is too full, which is, I don't even know if that's a good thing at this point. I'm getting myself a little bit too worked up, I think, but it's just like,
it's a good thing.
But what I'm saying is are we really blocking youth that looks like it's NHL ready simply because, like, you have Joe Veleno on the roster? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
And like that's not a shot at Joe Veleno. He's a fine fourth line center, but I look at Marco Kasper and I said, this is an NHL ready guy.
Right, but yeah, you answered your own question. It is because of the minutes. It 100% is because of the minutes. They're not gonna. Do you want Marco Kasper to play 8 minutes a night?
I don't know, man. I don't know anymore. Because at what point? What point? No, the question here is: at what point is? We saw it with the Holland era. You can't. He loved to overcook prospects, and I'm overblowing this, I'm sure, but you can't overcook prospects for too long because at some point you get diminished returns on playing against NHL caliber players when you're an NHL caliber player yourself. So at a certain point, I would argue the fourth line minutes in the NHL are more valuable than the top line minutes in the AHL because at least then you're practicing with NHL guys every single day. You're on the ice with the NHL team every single day. You're getting that valuable ice time. You're playing fourth line minutes, sure, but it's still NHL minutes. So I do wonder at some point, when do you get diminishing returns playing in the AHL versus even playing 8 minutes a night at the NHL level? I don't know. Kasper looked ready to me, and I'm trying to find any possible way to weasel him into this lineup.
Well, a couple of things. One, he will play for the Detroit Red Wings this year.
Yes.
I promise. So, like, I this is something I talk about on the Tiger Show, too. I think people way overreact to, and like us included, I'm not like calling anybody out, like we as in myself too, overreact to opening night rosters. Like that is a glimpse of the season. When has the opening night roster ever been the roster on game 82? Never, right? Like he's going to get called up at some point. I especially with the fact that they don't have a 13th forward. They literally, if a single I don't know, like underperformance or injury happens in the forward group, they literally have to call up somebody. So he will play in the NHL, assuming, his own health this year for starters. But B, like, we had this exact same conversation. You and I had this, I'm not kidding, word for word, exact same debate this time last year with Simon Edvinsson. He's now playing second pair at 21 years old. Marco Kasper is 20. He's not being over marinated. Like he's played 1 year in the AHL and is 20 years old. Like he is fine. He will play in the NHL this year. Edvinsson broke through and got his opportunity after we had this debate about whether he was getting blocked or overcooked last year. He's now a top 4 defenseman at 21 years old for the team on opening night. Like he will be okay and he will be fine and he will get plenty of opportunities and he's not getting over marinated.
I agree with you, but I will say we were on this podcast in the middle of the year last year talking about how Simon Edvinsson was blocked and how he deserved to be in the NHL. We had Max Boltman on, and he clearly said, we're like, what reason is there for Simon Edvinsson to not be on the NHL lineup at this point? And he said, simply put, he's blocked. And that is a roster construction problem.
Right.
I agree
Marco
at the
Kasper
start.
is blocked.
Which is not a good thing.
It's not a bad thing, though.
Again,
that it's like a negative is ridiculous. Like, do you remember when we lost like a billion games and like the organization was the shallowest we've like ever seen? Like it is good to have organizational depth. It's good to make people like make sure they're 100% ready to get called up. He's 20, and like we're not talking about like a 25-year-old that's been in the AHL for like 6 years. Like he's played not even a full season of AHL hockey and is starting off the year there this year and will be called up this year. Like, it's fine.
Right. And, like, I agree. So, like, the Simon Edvinsson thing, like, we did have this conversation. And then it did turn out like he needed a little bit more time in the AHL. That is true. Like, as much as we wanted him in the NHL last year, he did need a little bit more time. But come Christmas, he was ready. And it still took another 4 months for him to come up. And I just don't want that to happen again. And we're getting way too, I'm getting way too involved in this conversation.
He looked good in preseason. Like,
He looked
good in preseason, man. One of the games he played was against like literally like the not a single NHL player was on the opposing ice in one of the games he played. Like, I'm this is gonna make me just look like I love Marco Kasper. I think he's gonna be great. I want him in the NHL too. I don't want to like take the stance of like Marco Kasper shouldn't be here. I would give him middle 6 minutes tomorrow. I would if I was running the show, but like the notion that it's like a huge negative that he's not in the NHL on opening night is I think just way blown out of proportion.
No, and like that's where you're completely correct. Like what you said a few minutes ago is accurate. If like just because he's not on this lineup in the opening night doesn't mean he's not going to play this year. Like he could very well be on this roster at the end of October. But my point is just that Yzerman says that the best players are going to play, and if you earn a roster spot, you earn a roster spot. I feel personally that Casper earned a roster spot, and the only reason he's not in this lineup right now is because they don't want to move somebody else out of it, and that I don't like. But it's like you said, he will be on this lineup in this lineup before the season ends. Like we're splitting hairs on something that really doesn't carry a lot of weight right now, simply because we're not in the middle of the season. Right? Like we're 2 days away from the start of the opening season. This is the news we're talking about. But it just, as it stands right now, Justin Holl got waived. They're going to send Watson down. They have an open roster spot, and they're not going to use it on Casper as near as I can tell. And that bugs me. I'm be honest, it just bugs me.
Well, I think the point you made about like Yzerman saying the best players are going to play is a fair one, because like that's not true and is honestly like I just don't think that's how any organization. I guess maybe like the most win now like organizations maybe do that, but like people prioritize prospect development over pretty much anything. So like I agree I agree that Marco Kasper is one of the 23 best players in the organization, and he is not going to be in the NHL, and that is that is not what Steve Yzerman is saying he's doing. I agree with that. I just don't think it's a negative at all.
But to talk out both sides of my own mouth, right? Like, again, we go back to where are you slotting him in the lineup? Obviously, he's not going to be top line. Second line, do we believe he's not better than JT Compher yet? He's not ready to center the second line. You're not breaking up the third line because they play a very important role. So the only place for him is on the fourth line. And then it comes back to where it began, which is a great place to end, is like at what point is it diminishing returns to play in the AHL top line versus NHL fourth line? And that's, I guess for me, that's really where the conversation is what's more valuable for him at this point. Right. And I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, that's like to each their own thing. I mean, there are some people that think that 8 to 10 minutes in the NHL is more valuable for development than, 18 to 21 or whatever in the A. And that's just kind of a, personal preference, whatever you do, whatever your development style is, for sure.
For sure. All right, Scott, I love how when we disagree, we even agree. It's like, you made some really good points there. But also, like, I love how even when we're disagreeing, we're so polite to one another. That's why I love you. Scotty, any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. I'm just really pumped for the season to start so we can stop talking about, like, trivial nonsense. Like, this was a 40-minute show about a roster spot for a guy that's not going to play. Like... Right. I really just can't wait to get to actual regular season hockey, which is only a few days away. So
Thursday, baby. Although, are you even going to be around for it?
Yeah. That's going to be a wild day for your boy. Yeah, it's going to be a wild one.
Text me if you need me to go solo for the opening night. I'm just saying. If
it'll be a wild one. We'll see how the evening plays out.
There is a world where your dreams could come true. So we'll play that by ear for you. Buddy.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. We ball though.
We ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow, same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.